This is an episode of Unconfined, the podcast of the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future in Baltimore, Maryland. Unconfined is a podcast about industrial food animal production and its emerging alternatives. You can find us online at clf.jhsph.edu. Mike Milley is our sound engineer and produced our theme music. Your hosts are me, Christine Grillo, and Tom Philpott. Paulette O'Leary is our producer, and Natalie Woodwright is the executive producer. The opinions expressed here are not necessarily those of Johns Hopkins University or of the Center for a Livable Future. This episode of the Unconfined podcast will explore ways of thinking about land and agriculture from people who have methods and ideas outside of the dominant way of doing things. Today, we have with us special guest James Skeet, who with his wife, Joyce Skeet, runs Spirit Farm in Vanderwagen, New Mexico. They started the farm in 2015, and it's a demonstration and experiential farm. And it's situated on ancestral homeland of the Navajo Dene people. They use Indigenous knowledge to heal and nurture the land. And today we'll talk not only about regenerative agriculture, but also how it fits into James's view of the universe or his cosmology. Welcome, James, and thank you for joining us on Unconfined.
Well, thank you for having me. Yep.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'd love if you could start us off by talking about your cultural heritage and your relationship to the land that you have the farm running on, and how that relates to re-indigenizing the farming that you do.
Yeah, that's a pretty heavy duty question to start out with. Let's dive into it, right? Thank you for having me. First of all, I'm from the Red Cheek clan, the Jatlashi, that's kind of snap in the back of the mouth, and then Kia'ani is the my dad's side, which is born of, and my mom's was Kachini. So there's two clans that are very warrior type coming out of my matrilineal, and then my dad is more diplomatic, the Kia'ani, and then the Salt clan. So those combinations, I think, pretty much spell out the makeup of where I'm coming from. I live on property here that was broken up into what they call checkerboard land. These lands are really significant as to why and how we are at this moment in time living and doing things on this farm. My parents and their grandfathers, I cannot remember really in the oral tradition how far back we go. It's predating the putting Navajos in concentration camp by Kit Carson in Fort Sumner in a place called Bosque Redondo, which was to the Navajos a place of suffering. Walde. It's an old ancient word of suffering. So what happened in that time, Kit Carson being a mountain man, had a really good relationship with Indigenous people, Native people, spoke some of the languages. And so they trusted him, but somehow along the way, he got swayed by, the government, U.S. government, which was at the beginning, point in which 100 years they were in motion, and they wanted to create this manifest destiny from the east to the west coast. So in that context, I think our people have lived here as far as I can remember, or my grandparents or their great grandparents. But my dad's side, which are called the Nullies, my dad's side, there was an old man called Old Man Skeet. He was a hunter, and he was the one that hunted to Fort Sumner and back. So he was always involved in some kind of food system for our tribe. we were very destitute when we came out of Fort Sumner from a nation that was so powerful and were lords of the land because of our buffalo, which was the sheep, the Chiril sheep, which was introduced by the Spanish, Moors and Portuguese, and they brought it over because it was the trash sheep. But what people don't realize, and that's what we're researching now, is that it became a landrace sheep, which means that after a certain point in time, they still had the wildness. They weren't as fully domesticated, and they were smaller, but it produced some of the sweetest meats. So this is what the Navajos from the 1600s into to the point at Fort Sumner, Walday, they covered the land with such intensity because they were eating this very nutritious food, along with the propagation of being horsemen. Like a lot of the tribes, they moved into a bartering economy, into a horse economy, which to us in the Southwest, this sheep in this brittle environment really became a powerful source of protein for the Navajos. And that's where I think we became very, very powerful as a nation up to the point of Kit Carson in the late 1800s.
Did you say churro sheep?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so I understand that you have sheep on your farm. Is that the species that you're raising?
Yeah, we raise a couple different species, but our hallmark is the Chiril sheep because from what I gathered, the research that my wife and I have done is related to maybe about between 500 to 800 of the genetic line still left without the inbreeding into other domestic sheep. And this sheep is incredible. It's the most regenerative hoofed animal on the surface of the earth in comparison to other like deer or antelope. So they don't destroy the biocrust. They enhance the biocrust in the Southwest. And that's more stuff that needs to be researched right now, from not just from the agricultural production capitalism scene, but more along the line of the word you use, heritage breeds and things that I think has manifest the symbiotic relationship between the land, the people, the food that they eat, as well as the how it's moving, because the tribe in itself, the language in itself is it's nomadic. So these animals are transnomadic. So it fit right into the context of their cosmology.
And you said this was a species brought over by the Spanish Moors?
Yeah, the Jewish Moors, because they were fleeing persecution from Spain and Portugal. Yeah.
So you say they're the best species at regenerating land, the best hoofed animal to regenerate land. Can you give a couple of examples? You said they're really good for the biocrust.
Yeah. Disclaimer. That's my perspective. That they're the best.
That's fair.
But the research needs to happen. But everywhere we've gone, when the mountain men and early settler pioneers, whatever you call it, homesteaders, came into the New Mexico area, they saw tall grasses, and it was in relationship with the symbiotic relationship with the Chiril sheep and the land and how they moved on the surface of the earth.
I wanted to talk about re-indigenizing farming, and I feel like this is a good way to get into that, is talking about the land.
Yeah. I think that's an even deeper question, even deeper drill down from just the cultural and agricultural framework. But the framework is a very settler European agricultural framework, and that's the pieces that I've been presenting in my workshops and sharing with people. And is that our epistemology is very different, and it mimics us in nature. Whereas the predatory pupil of let's say a dog or a wolf is round, and it's very concentrated, siloed to extract, and it reduces whatever prey it's looking into, and it chases that. and fades out everything in the outskirts, of the horizontal view. It's more of a siloed concentration of extraction, which is if you look at it. And then the other one is the sheep has a more horizontal pupil. It's looking from side to side, and that's how indigenous people are in their science, in their observation. And that's what I've been presenting in terms of indigeneity, is that there's so many images, which I call indigenous fractals, so many images in nature itself that governs the way we exist in the ecosystem. And so the ecosystem is driven by a Western European concentrated energy of aggression coming out of Europe into the colonization of this Western hemisphere. And I don't think that's really been, what do you call it? It hasn't been transformed or healed in the context of a cultural standpoint. So what they were serfs and slaves, and then when they came in, they could have private land, and so they enslaved the agricultural system again by people that are willing to do the work on the farm. That's continued. That's been the focus of a lot of things that are happening today. So indigenizing is being driven by land as a commons. And that's the problem that we've had with private land ownership, is that it's not a commons. It's owned by a private person. And those two are in collision in terms of their epistemology or worldview lenses of how we own the land versus that of the land owning us.
Yeah. And I love it when you say that, and I want to talk about that in a minute. But I'm wondering if we could just pause for a minute, because I'm not sure if our listeners are going to be familiar with what you mean when you talk about, settlers and colonizing land and decolonizing land. I wonder if you could just give us a couple minutes on basic.
Yeah. It started from a philosopher named Descartes, which, I think therefore I am French philosopher. And then, of course, the implementation, operational point of that was Francis Bacon going after women healers, and in a sense, creating this white male dominance, which sets into motion societal shifts of currency-based economy at the time, capitalism, some things that did a shift in the Industrial Revolution. And in that Industrial Revolution, Europeans, their teeth were rotting. Russia was in dire straits because they had famines after famines. So the introduction of potato into the food system helped bring vitamin C into the European food structure. And of course, Russia wouldn't be Russia if it wasn't for the Mayan potatoes. Along with, the tomatoes in Italy, it didn't come from Italy, it came from the Western Hemisphere. So there's a lot of foods that was brought into that European context. So in that colonization is really part of the educational system that says you're a cog in the machinery. You're given a job description, and so you fit into this context while the empire rules you. And so that system was transferred to the Americas, the colonists, Franklin and Jefferson, and I'm trying to think. They're not my founding fathers, but they're your founding fathers. They saw the Six Nations, the Iroquois Confederacy, working in such a smooth governmental operation, which was in essence, the application of a republic. That's so hidden under a lot of the things of the Constitution. They would bring out the beaded scroll and say, "We the people." All those things are in the context. That's why you call them commander in chief. And that's why we enjoy coffee today, because of the tea embargo. The colonists dressing up in the executive branch, which is the Mohawks, emulating, taxation without representation. And then that's when we started drinking coffee. But the Brits would point to the Americans and say, those Indians, and the way they say those Indians was those Americans. So the word is not coming from American Vespucci, because it originates from a cultural context of the Brits saying, those wayward people that are not in the monarchy now. And that's where even in the paintings, they painted the early native people almost like Greek gods. They were emulating the republic and rolling it out, and then they adopted that. Of course, the pandemic annihilated many of these tribes and reduced them down to just paupers and beggars in those colonized communities. And of course, Franklin and Jefferson, they use the pursuit of happiness. They had originally put in the pursuit of land, and they marked that out because it was too salient, too robust to bring this to the forefront. So they put in happiness, a more abstracted word. So in that context of colonization, it's what we know, what we've been taught: detachment from the earth, detachment from our food, detachment from these systems that are natural, which I call indigenous fractals. So there's a disconnect.
Yeah, that's a good segue into the phrase that you use sometimes, which is indigenous regenerative intelligence. And could you tell us about that? What
Sure.
is indigenous? Yeah.
A lot of this stuff comes from dreams that I have, and I was trying to articulate what it was that we were doing on the farm. And I've been studying a lot of indigeneity, decolonization, and then also regenerative. I saw the farming community, corporate farms pick up on the regenerative and sleeping with corporations. I didn't like that. That was a wrong turn in the agricultural system. And then the intelligence is what I mentioned, the mimicking the earth, the creator, the connection with the cosmology. So indigenous is using local materials simply. Regenerative is we have desertified land, which my grandfather did. And starting from zero, moving up, regenerating the land. And then the intelligence is how do we tie into what nature has already prescribed and displayed in front of us, but we'd rather dominate and control rather than coexisting with nature.
Right. So intelligence is a system of patterns and sort of laws of nature.
Yes.
And
yes. Yeah. And the reason, if you don't mind explaining a little bit of that intelligence, is it's the industrial sort of the education system that has almost framed us as animistic and marginalized our philosophy about the earth into a segue that's on the gutter side, of philosophical discussions, and it's not emanating from the earth itself, which our philosophy comes from the earth up, whereas European philosophy comes from the dual Platonic Socratic thought that comes from top to bottom.
Why don't we go back to we don't own the land owns us?
Yeah, that's a very deep discussion. I've been working with a couple of writers, journalists, one of them being Sarah Mock. We've had some podcasts together where the land itself, stewardship of the land is much deeper than just the physical aspect of it, which is how we look at agriculture, is how we look at sequestration of lands, and how capitalism and industrialization has used land as a resource. Even in conservation contexts, we call the forest a resource. All those are European, detachment from the earth concepts. What I'm talking about is a little bit deeper than, the stewardship of the spirituality of the land. What is the land saying? What is the land? Like I said, we've been marginalized in our so-called animism when it's really concentric views of how we're all connected in some context. And that's what's missing in the ecology, farming, and every aspect of how we treat the land. We don't treat it with sacredness or respect, as well as we've commoditized water. We've done some things to the land that has been very irreversible. So, I think it's a lot deeper. The wound is much deeper than what we are assuming, that there is no wound and there is no concepts of outside of the context of industrialization, production, capitalism.
Right. So, if I'm understanding, even sometimes when we say we want to be stewards of the land, that's still top down.
Yes.
It's not a real connection.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, can you describe what a more authentic connection would be? Letting the land steer you.
Well, that's been really interesting for me in the last couple of years, because I do a lot of biochar stuff, amendments in the soil, and looking at biochar. But what's typically happens is a couple of white guys get a hold of this, create the technology, and then sell it to us. It's usually the typical scenario of what's going to happen, and they make it so scientifically descriptive that a lot of ordinary people would rather just not avoid. So what I've been doing is putting in the context of the cosmology of our indigenous people. That's when medicine people meditate, they enter into that space, which is the nano level, and the nano level is driven by cations, different charges within that carbon compound that's established through when you stop that from charcoal going into ash, you biochar it right in that perspective, and it creates these catacombs, or charge fill catacombs, which is really the origins of the earth, where the microbes and the fungi move in there, create their homes, and then they charge that whole char up, which is a very stable carbon in the soil. And so that deep down connection with that is in relationship to the different levels and hyphae, plant hyphae, the microbial area where the fungi and the bacteria work together. And then you move up into the exudates, the roots, and then on up. So that's how you really look at the drill down. You got to put a ceremony and a description to that in order to, how would you say, handle these very complex energy that's coming from the earth.
Yeah, that's so there's a lot of soil health that you know about and practice, and that actually leads me to ask you one of the questions I had for you was if you could talk about farming from a place of biology versus farming from a place of chemistry. And I know soil health is really all about the biology that you've just been talking about.
Well, that's what I'm expressing in the biochar and the biology. The biochar is very chemistry, set of a dormant earth, and then it's the biology that creates the life. And we don't know if bacteria actually dies. If this fungi has been hanging around for a long time. So those are some things to meditate on and honor. We have dishonored what's below the earth, what's below our feet. And that's part of the indigenous cosmology, is honoring on all levels and working within that cycle, celebrating in ceremony this energy that flows back and forth down to our feet, beyond our feet, and up into the sky, which creates the atmosphere and the biotic pump and the water system, the water cycle. So all that has been disrupted by human intervention. And some of it is because our philosophy of how we approach the earth has got some problems, and it's got some issues, and it's got some linear perspectives, and it's using reductionist science rather than native science.
Right. What you're talking about is more of a systems thinking, a systems approach, as opposed to fixing one problem at a time.
Yeah, we got to be careful how we label, like animism, systems thinking, regeneration. And I call it shadow casting. And shadow casting is what we do here on Earth, the shadow. And then the actual object that's doing the shadow. This comes from Black Elk Speaks, what we see today physically the real thing is the spiritual thing for us. It's flipped. Because of dual Platonic thought, it's separated the physical and the spiritual. So philosophically, you have to heal that inside your mind in order to move into the space. And so a lot of what people do in terms of the pedigree of privilege is, you give it semantic labels just so you can move it out of the way and marginalize it. And so unless you're doing ceremonies in accordance to what you're doing, shadow casting, to get to that real spiritual, deep sacredness of the earth.
Yeah. Okay. That's really
Sorry.
interesting.
I kind of blew out of context with the interview.
No, I love all the Platonic philosophizing. Speaking of sacredness, I know that there's a lot of water scarcity where you are, and you're doing a lot of dry land farming, and you mentioned desertification. And so one of the things I'm wondering is, how do you approach that desertification? But another thing from what you said earlier that made me curious is the Southwest has always been desertified, right? Or is that a consequence of colonization? It's always
or an observation of somebody that sees it rain all the time.
Right.
But people living here,
living
epistemology, really, it's the lenses we're looking through.
Right.
We're seeing certain things. I think an Easterner would say this is very desertified. But people like the Taos people, the Lagunas, the Acamas that have lived here for eons, a long time, the Navajos, the Hopis, all those people see it as a very productive, very fruitful landscape. And, the medicine, the plants here, the plant hyphae is some of the most potent, powerful medicine on the face of the earth because of the condition and the context. So to us, it's very much normal. It's very much it's on a hypo level. It's what we know and what we engage with and how we walk on the earth. Do we walk in beauty, or do we come in and do some stuff that is unnecessary to the way the land functions? So it's really it's a very difficult question, I would have to say, but I know that the treatment of water is very sacred, and they capture the water from Father Sky, and they also protect the springs that are around certain cleavages of the mesas, capture it and use it for irrigation. They honor the Rio Grande or the San Juan, and not to, every time you flush the toilet, you're using 10 gallons, So to us, that's a collapse of reality of how we exist on the earth. And we're always taking into consideration that there is a certain description, ancestral definition of things that have happened on the earth that need to be kept intact in order to keep the balance. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to articulate some very abstract, indigenous perspectives. Yeah.
And I'm curious about how people from the Southwest would characterize the East Coast as just this rainy, wet, dripping place.
Yeah, you're dealing with mold and some other stuff, which we don't have a problem with here.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I know was 2015 when you started the farm? Is that?
That's a hard question for me, because my wife is the one that really sets in, she's a lot more, she keeps me in line on numbers.
Okay.
So yeah, it's been about 11 years now.
Yeah. And you started it, the two of you, as a demonstration farm. And then I've read somewhere that you transitioned into thinking of it more as an experiential farm. And I wasn't familiar with that term for farming.
I'm so glad that you've read some of our, propaganda on the website. That's cool, because that's the main reason why, because as a writer, you have to put some of this on what Russell Means would call dead leaves,
Uh-huh.
instead of oral tradition. So getting back to your question of why we started and what was the incentive, what was the feel behind it. I was working with United Healthcare as the travel liaison in the state of New Mexico. We were rolling out the Obamacare at the time, and I was trying to put into context the health system that is more appropriate for Indigenous people, because the health system is really driven by, um, things that are just not in accordance to how we work with healing on the res or in Indigenous worldviews. They identify the patient, instead of putting in the context of community. They also send a lot of synthetic drugs that have a lot of side effects, whereas Chinese medicine, as well as other indigenous medicine, look at a general systems model of many different forces that help arrange and herbs and things like that, so that you don't have those side effects. And connecting food as medicine instead of food as a commodity. So all those things are things that we have shared with people, and in that context, oh, okay, James, you have a big mouth, and we're going to put you out and become a leader of being an advocate for water and soil, and so I'm just trying to run the farm here to make it practical, not just theoretical, and that was our grabbing each other's hands and say, let's dive into this. And of course, my wife's background is Mennonite and Amish. Talk about food security. Those guys are already there, So we have now, and people have asked us how we've done with COVID and now the political mishmash that's going on. I said, we're ready for this. We've been saying all along that we need to, we got a 2-year supply of food here. So we can function without functioning in the larger grocery grid or energy grid. So that's been kind of our approach, and we very much as an organization have tried to stray away from federal funding and tribal funding, and also state government funding, because I've worked in those areas and I saw the misuse and also the heavy use of the governmental drug. And I tried to stay away from that and not be consumed by that. So I sad to say a lot of organizations are tanking right now because of what's going on economically.
Right. But you've been pretty independent all along. So
yeah, but we get lonely. We get lonely. We want to share this message, and that's one of the reasons why I appreciate your podcast. We all have to change in some context. We have been changing. That's all we're saying is that we can do it. You can do it.
Right. Right. Well, that leads me to my next question, which I think it should probably be our last. I can let you go and get on with your day, but
Wow.
You've talked about transformation. I've heard you talk about transformation, and that you and your wife, and hopefully some of us people here on Earth, are part of a transformation that's underway now.
Yeah.
What can you say about that?
Sure. When I was working with an international organization, we were doing child development and community development. We were trying to define poverty and then development in accordance to non-formal education or education that is outside the box, using the community support. And we found that we ran into this sort of colonized system within natural systems that have been pushed out. And so the people in that generation are destitute in a lot of ways. And so we wanted to do change in that context. And that was part of the things that has been snuffed out with the aid to other countries. There's a lot we can learn from that. It's a part of the colonization, the Commonwealth, different things that have pushed a lot of these people into marginalization. Capitalism that always has money for the top and then very little, and they're doing all the work, so it's a very top down thing. But when I was working with that, we worked on some things. One of them was asset-based development versus that of deficit. What are the needs-based development? So what's working in that community? So in that community that was working, we started seeing that we needed to take bite-sized chunks and to tear it apart and then transform later on the systems that have created that. So in a way, the farm is an experiment of that. It's transformative. It's moved from demonstration to experiential, that there are changes within that connection with indigenous fractals, as well as the regeneration, physical operational regeneration of the soil, of the land. And we are just facilitators, not growers. We don't grow. It's the creator that grows. So knowing that, and the land owns us, we don't own the land. So those kind of concepts, epistemology that we've approached, rechanging our semantics and slowly decolonizing ourselves, taking our history and moving it forward as a part of the decolonization. So all these things started to embed itself in the mission and the work and the vision that we're doing. And as far as I know, Joyce and I are not looking back. We left that system, which I'm not interested in sustaining that system. I'm interested in sustaining the future system that will bring that indigeneity back into context. So that's what I'm hoping for, and that's the energy that's here.
Yeah, it's a really big vision, but it's also really humble. It sort of combines that humility. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And I wish you a lot of luck. I know when we're speaking right now is April. It's lambing season. Mm-hmm. Our listeners won't be hearing this until the summer, but I wish you a lot of luck with your lambs. And a lot of health to everyone, to you and your wife. And,
thank you. Yeah.
I look forward to hearing more from Spirit Farm.
All right. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Take care.
Take care.